Hi, my name is Siddhartha Dash or Sid Dash, and I'm the Chief Researcher at Chartis Research. Today, I'm here with Jason Shane to go over the diffusion of AI in financial institutions, specifically the compliance units of those institutions. Without any further ado, I'll ask Jason to introduce himself. Jason?
Thanks, Sid. A real pleasure to be here. So I'm Jason Shane. I head up strategy and innovation for Symphony AI Financial Services. Symphony AI is a company providing solutions to banks, insurance companies for financial crime prevention. So we develop AI solutions front to back that we deploy for these companies, and we have 200 customers that are using that technology today. My background is predominantly in investment banking, so I spent 3 years heading up group compliance technology for UBS. And before that, I was head of compliance technology at Credit Suisse. And super happy to be here today. Thank you.
Great to have you. And so we have someone who has sort of deep experience in financial institutions and is looking at strategy for Symphony, who has foundational technologies in the AI space, to discuss with us the diffusion of AI in this space. If you see some key issues from our research, if you will, our research at Chartis, we are seeing a broad set of available technologies, indeed technologies in some ways, which has outpaced the capacity of institutions to absorb those technologies into their own organizations. In many ways, that's even more true about AI. What we're seeing generally in technology, that's even more true from an AI perspective. We are also seeing the adoption of some of these latest technologies is very selective. And again, even more true for AI, very selective by the type of organization we are seeing and where it's being adopted, if you will. And then finally, all of us have been talking about how hard data is as a challenge, but it continues to be a challenge in our view. It remains an issue. With that, let me switch over to Jason and sort of really think through let's get some of his views on what are the challenges and what are the issues for the financial services industry. So Jason, how do we see these changes, even though we have a wide range of technologies available, indeed a wide range of Minority Report style technologies out there? But why do we, where is the adoption?
Yeah, Sid, the last year, 2 years has seen probably the greatest shift in technology that we've seen in a long time. We've had AI with us now for many, many years. The rise of generative AI a few years ago. Now it's the rise of agentic AI. And technology has just moved so much more quickly than we've ever seen it. The thing is, though, that compliance is really designed as a control function. It's designed to be to make sure that firms have the right kind of governance in place. They are able to kind of ensure that those controls and what they report from a regulatory standpoint are firm and are covered. And so therefore, whilst many firms have been kind of implementing things like predictive AI for many years, the new technology is still something that many companies are really kind of getting to grips with. The other thing is regulatory frameworks have evolved around things like breaches and enforcement actions as well. And so companies have to kind of deal with outcomes, from those types of events. You also have many firms which have a lot of legacy systems in place as well. And, there may be some things like static rules, maybe some kind of data challenges that you have as well. Data remains siloed, remains noisy. These are all kind of like the challenges. And then the tone from the top as well traditionally has been, how do we ensure that we can demonstrate that we've caught the issues, as opposed to how do we prevent the issues going forward. So in summary, technology has advanced probably more quickly than operating models have done in firms. However, companies that are starting to kind of experiment with the latest technologies are seeing the art of the possible, seeing the opportunity, if you like. And that, to me, ultimately means that they can become more proactive. They could become more preventative in their approach as well. And, ultimately then they can start to adopt and changes to their operating model to advance with this. So I think I would say I'm ever the optimist when it comes to not quite the minority report style technology, but for firms to take advantage and to move forward with this.
So you really think banks and financial institutions can overcome the archaeology and the organizational complexity?
Absolutely.
But I've also heard you talk about this whole idea of embedded sort of AI. What does that really mean for banks, if you will?
So it really means that the AI is part of the day-to-day flow. That's part of the detection process for a firm. It's part of the decisioning process. So firms will have rules that may be in place for many, many years, decades, in fact. We know that the challenges that with rules have is that you have to have rules in place, but you have challenges around the noise, the false positives, and so on. So many firms over the years have implemented and embedded, predictive AI, machine learning into a lot of their core processes, particularly within compliance, and quite successfully. And you have things like dynamic risk scoring. We're seeing more and more of that from many of our customers. Scoring that's updated based on behavioral changes, for example, of their customers, or alerts that start to trigger things like preventative steps. When you think about moving further into the kind of upstream into the KYC processing, for example. And then we've seen more and more of the AI coming into things like network analytics, that type of the type of technology where you can start to do or start to see relationships that could present challenges to the firm as well. So you have those things which are, I think, well embedded in firms today. And then where the firms are starting to kind of test out, if you like, is with the concept of the agentic AI or the AI agents, which is really, when you think about some of the things that perhaps that we're doing for customers, we're testing with them. We're doing things in alert triage space. There's a massive opportunity. KYC refresh, adverse media checking, for example. Overall regulatory monitoring, areas that we think there's some real opportunity for this type of AI to be embedded into the processes. So it's almost like a shift from periodic reviewing to continuous monitoring and a bit more forward thinking in that sense. It's the reality of what we're seeing from our kind of customers and their adoption of AI. So predictive AI really is well founded. It's adopted well and it's well founded. Generative AI and agentic AI now, lots and lots of interest, lots of proof of concepts, and that's where we're seeing a lot more interest from the work we're doing with customers around our agents as part of embedding into their end-to-end flow.
So you made a very good point about the things that are already working and things that are there in the substrate. But what are the challenges going forward? Is it more data? Is it more organizational? Is it an inability to get the technology into the environment? Where do you see the operating challenges, if you will?
Yeah, there are a number of if you like, areas where companies may feel compromised around this. And I mean, you said a couple of them. So data is the obvious place to start, right? Data can be siloed. Data can be inconsistent. You're not utilizing all the different data signals that's available to you. How do you ensure that you have the right data context and that your data ultimately is AI ready? Having data where you have, if you're, certainly for the larger companies that we work with, which have multiple different divisions, may have different views of what a client actually is. And so therefore you have to resolve that. You have to kind of do your entity resolution and so on. So having contextualized data that's resolved and presented and effectively is AI ready, and data that is well governed as well, is super important. Then you have what I would call structure and operating model. Within compliance, fraud, your risk teams, there may be teams that are kind of disconnected across organizations. Now, particularly with the larger firms where you do have some of these separate organizational constructs, you're not necessarily going to find those types of overlaps unless you bring that data together, and then you start to kind of look at perhaps changes to the structure, to the operating model. And then lastly, technology, ultimately, right? So technology, in many cases, when we think about AI in particular, AI has been considered almost like a bolt-on. The feeling is, as a firm, we have to have AI. We've now got a chief AI officer, for example. We have to demonstrate how we're using AI. And it's almost like if you do that and you don't have the right governance in place as well, then it becomes a bit of a challenge to truly get the value from AI. Moving from the existing kind of traditional rules base to more probabilistic models is a real classic way to actually really implement that, to start with, for example. Ultimately, companies need to have a more dynamic way to solve what has been really a static problem in the past. They need to be able to keep up with things like regulatory changes that are kind of constant, across all the different jurisdictions. They need to continuously manage the threat landscape as well, which is, constantly changing. And you think about some of the big macro threats that we're all facing, continuously changing on a daily basis. In this way, they can really maintain their regulatory compliance and control environments and enabling, most importantly, the core businesses of their firms to grow. And this is how actually we are supporting our customers with, we call this our always-on compliance strategy, ensuring that customers can understand changes from a regulatory standpoint, can understand some of the new threats. We can implement and support them with the technology that we have in place, enabling them to maintain that regulatory compliance and enabling them to grow their core businesses ultimately.
All right, that's a fairly good, interesting list of what people should do, if you will, and what can be done and what's out of the possible. But taking a slightly different view, and given the fact that very often new technologies take a long time to diffuse through organizations. Indeed, one of the oft-quoted numbers is that electricity took 30 years in many countries to diffuse throughout the manufacturing system. But we do have a lot of history. I mean, in compliance technology, we do have a lot of history of things that have worked and things that haven't, and you have seen them across several large organizations. What would be your perspective of what not to do? What are the mistakes to avoid, if you will?
That's a good question, actually. I've always seen, I suppose to the point I made a little bit before, which is the need to just implement AI without actually fully understanding the strategy, with understanding what outcomes and what use cases that a firm really wants to tackle, whether it's to be more, effective in the quality of what they're producing, or more efficient in terms of how they're doing things as well. What we do is not easy, and because of the kind of the tight controls that we operate under, but ultimately, firms that do have a good strategy in place and actually identify the use cases that they want to tackle, and have the right almost partner, technology firm to partner with to be able to support them with this, are the ones that are making the most progress. What we're seeing is buying models without clear understanding of the objectives, is not necessarily the way to go. You want to make sure that how do we implement those models? How do we govern those models? What is the data that we need to ensure that the models will run effectively? And of course, firms have to go through the whole model governance and risk management process as well. And so don't treat AI as almost like a bolt-on instead of embedding it. There's certain things that you can definitely augment successfully with AI, no question. But also bringing in the whole data quality process as well, really kind of helps to support that. So start with the strategy, understand the use cases, look at where you have the data challenges to resolve, and then bring the AI to those use cases.
Oh, thank you. That's very foundational. You need to know where you're going and how you're going
Absolutely.
to actually get to your destination.
Absolutely.
Right.
So I have a question for
Sure.
you. You've been firing a few questions to me about the world of AI, but you know, in your position with the breadth of understanding you have across many different firms, it'd be really good to understand, looking at the whole financial ecosystem, what are you thinking about the pace of diffusion of technology inside organizations, and especially when you think about the world of compliance that we're in.
I think if you look at how technology diffuses through the system, you'll find that first of all, it it diffuses fastest in use cases that have a very direct link with the problem structure. I mean, for instance, if you saw how AI machine learning models diffuse through the system, they diffuse through it in say retail banking very quickly. They were much slower in say capital markets and other areas. So where there are existing models, it tends to be slower. Where there are no models before, it tends to be faster. And where there's a direct link, you can get a lot of statistical data. In retail banking, it's a lot easier to get a lot of statistical data. There's a lot of individual use cases. So I think the diffusion of technology is, the linking up to a advanced use case is really the most important thing. I mean, having a use case that fits very tightly with the technology in question is where things can, and it's always better. Always, you'll see it's the low hanging fruit that gets consumed quickly. I mean, it's a truism, but I do think that that vendors and institutions should focus on the easier problems first, solve them, move on to the hard conceptual ones. If there's a conceptual gap, maybe that's the second stage of the problem. If there is a strong human judgment somewhere in the way, maybe that's something that we should look at
Mm,
the next stage.
yeah, interesting.
So, sort of now, I think to sort of wrap our discussion. Uh, if there was one thing you wanted to emphasize in everything that we've said so far, and we've been around the block a little bit, if you will. So, what would that be? One theme, one message, if you wanted to leave behind.
Um, so I truly believe that institutions really need to think about how they design their operations to take advantage of the technology that's available to them. And the goal is clearly about prevention, right? It's about prevention. It's not about dealing with the volume of detections. It's about fewer, higher quality alerts, for example. KPIs that get shifted from cases closed to risks avoided, risk identified, risk avoided, and acting, before regulators or, incidents may force the issue ultimately. Just to link back to your Minority Report comment at the beginning, the context of what we call always on is incredibly important. It leverages the technology that's available to ensure that companies can get ahead of the regulatory changes. They can get ahead of new threats. It's very difficult to get ahead. It's very difficult to keep up actually with the bad actors. But what we're doing with our clients is really helping them to really try and get to that point. Protecting and defending without significantly increasing their compliance cost base as well is pretty fundamental. And so, as ultimately we're dealing with dynamic problems, and therefore we need dynamic solutions around this. Fundamentally, this is a continuous game of playing catch up. So Minority Report might not be that far in the future, but certainly the technology is there that, and we see that working with our customers to support them, to help them on this journey, Sid. So just on that point, then perhaps there's always like a call to action around doing something, right? So have a look at your adoption of AI. Talk to companies like Symphony AI, because the agentic technology is here and here to help, and can make a difference. That type of thing.
I was thinking that, just to paraphrase what you just said, I was thinking that I'd take a little blob of things that you already said. Because I was thinking that I would use that as a call to action. I'd say, Jason, I like your point about dynamic problems require dynamic solutions. I think for institutions out there, the key is scan the technologies available even before you need them. The Minority Report is a good idea, and think deeply about the threat landscape and how you're reacting to that. Think about how your operational infrastructure is aligned to the technologies available. Always benchmark that. And you can do that by talking to vendors like Symphony AI, talking to us, or thinking deeply. And that's it from us. Thank you for watching.